So let's begin. Our topic for today is about audit process, specifically accepting an engagement. So dire mag-start na gyud ang ato ang bali the audit gyud no audit itself. Now, accepting an engagement is like a pre-audit nga part na siya. Pre-audit in the sense nga katong audit proper gyud kani is before pa ka or deciding when you are to accept an engagement or not. Unsa ang mga factors nga kailangan nimo i-take into consideration on the part of your firm, on the part of the client. So kana ato niya nang ma-discuss later on. Now, the audit of the financial statements generally begins with, of course, financial statements prepared by the entity's management. Because as you can remember, it is the responsibility of the management to provide you with their financial statements. Now, without these financial statements, there would be no audit to perform. Now, a general approach to auditing financial statements would require consideration of financial statement assertions, audit procedures, and audit evidences. So, kani, mag-talk lang sa tower. Since we are still at the start, we will still be talking about your different assertions, or we need to talk first about your different assertions. So, now, again, as I mentioned, your management is responsible for the fair presentation of your financial statements that reflect the nature and operation of the entity. And then in representing that the financial statements in accordance with the applicable financial reporting framework, management implicitly or explicitly makes assertions regarding the recognition, measurement, presentation, and disclosure of the various elements of financial statements and related disclosures. So sige tag kadungog about assertion no unsa gyuday na ang assertion. Diba? When you define assertion, or kung may kag assertion lang sa English, diba? When you say you assert something, it means that you are, or when you say assertion, it means na you have a statement, you have a confident and forceful statement of a fact or a belief. So, kung mu-assert ka og something, di ba, murag na kay ganahan nga, or kung may kag mu-assert ka, you are stating a fact or a belief nga tuhuan sa imuhang other person. So, in auditing, basically, mura siya ingon ana, pero diri, ang imuha ng assertions, ang iyahang claims being the facts, ang iyahang claims na is in relation na to establishing whether your FS are fairly presented or not. So, mo na ang iyahang fact nga i-claim. So, naaman tayo mga different assertions niya in relation to, again, measurement, presentations, and disclosures. Now, assertions are important in the aspect of auditing since, if you think about it, financial statements is not necessarily a more siya lie detector sa usa ka organization, di ba? Dili man gid ka makaingon at first glance nga kana iyang financial statement nga gihatag is tinuod or dili. Mao gani imuha siyang i-audit, di ba? For you to validate. So, if wala kay mga assertions nga i-determine, wala kay murag mga foundations or basis sa imuha niyang ibuhaton nga mga procedures or sa imuha niyang ihatag nga mga opinions. So, assertions are defined as a statement that is believed to be true by the speaker, or in this case, believed to be true by the management. Kaya again, sila ba ang prepare sa ilang financial statements? So, it is difficult to measure whether the statement is true, just like the case of the financial statements, since again, the information provided is given by the organization or the client. So, ikaw auditor, dili pagid ka makahatag as we've been talking about. You cannot give a absolute assurance that whatever is presented by your client is indeed true or it is indeed free from any material misstatements. So, that is why kailangan mo makahibaw sa kana nga mga assertions, di ba? Kay mo man imong gamiton to check if sakto ba gid ang mga claims nga gihatag ni management. So, let's understand it further sa next nga mga examples. So, first we have here the assertions about classes of transactions and events for the period under audit. So, unsa ang mga claims daw in relation to your transactions and events? First is occurrence or para na ko mas diri ni siya hinumdumon sa keyword nga kokak. Pero wala lang siya na arrange, no. Pero first is occurrence. So this claims that transactions and events that have been recorded have occurred and pertain to the entity. Meaning, gi-claim if na siya sa imong financial statement, imo na siyang gi-claim or that is recorded, imo na siyang gi-claim nga nahitabo gid na siya. So, as an auditor, you need to verify if those assertions or those claims really occur. So, if nahitabo ba gid na siya nga transaction, unsa man ang imuhang buhaton to assert or to determine if that assertion is being followed. So, diyan na mo come in ang imuhang mga audit procedures, which ma-discuss niya na sa mga succeeding na mga chapters. Next, the completeness assertion, wherein all transactions and events that should have been recorded have been recorded, which is, I believe, self-explanatory naman, no? So, dapat tanawin mo your financial statement is complete. Now, kani siya, remember, this is in relation to your transactions and events for the period. Kaya there are other assertions nga magbalik-balik ra na siya later on, or it would be applicable to other areas po. Next assertion as to your transaction is your accuracy, meaning the amounts and other data relating to your recorded transactions and events have been recorded appropriately. Meaning, sakto ang mga amounts. So, unsa man ang muhang padebuhaton na you can either mag-tracing ka, di ba? Or mag-vouching ka, depende. Sumutanaw kasi mo mga source documents, imo siyang itakdo sa kung unsa ang recorded sa ilang books and the like. So, that is one way of you measuring the accuracy. Another thing is, if sakto ba gid ang computations, like for example, class, common errors, and it should common errors, pero naagyo mga instances wherein masayop ang imuhang supplier sa pag-compute sa ilahang VAT. If makakita mo na sa OR, kanang sa VAT entity ang imuhang supplier, di ba, ilaham nang i-compute ang, or ilaham nang i-show ang amount pertaining to VAT o pila imuhang tax base. Now, na may uban, which is dili gyud malikayan nga ang mga cashier is dili sila kabaw kung saan pagkuha sa imuhang VAT. So, instead, ang ilahang mabutang dito, di ba, supposedly your paid amount is divided by 1.12, pero ang ilahang buhaton, paid amount is multiplied by 12%. So, mo na ilang ibutang ditong amount sa VAT, which is sayop na daan. Tapos, if ang imuha pag yung clerk is dili baron magbantay, diba? So, iharang kopyaon kung unsa po yung nakabutang dito sa receipt, so, kana palang na-instance daan is mawala ng imuhang accuracy. So, mao na ang dapat po di mong i-check. Makitaan man sa good na siya kay tungod ang imuhang base na amount is dili man siya mo-match sa kung pila. Ang imuhang tax base is di siya mo-match sa imuhang VAT nga gi-recognize or your output tax nga your input tax nga gi-recognize. So, kana basta accuracy lang of your transactions. Next is your cut-off, wherein transactions and events have been recorded in the correct accounting period. Now, kani, dapat lang yun careful because, again, there are transactions, especially at year-end, nga kailangan ka mag-accrue. Diba? Kana nga mga instances, kay accrual-based ba yata sa accounting. So, there are mga expenses nga wala pagita kay baw kung pila ang amount, di ba? So kana diha lang gyud nga area nga dapat ta careful. So kana as to the cut about the transaction, so panantawon gyud na nimo ang mga receipt nga mga dates for instance, o kung applicable pa man na siya nga reporting period, wala ba yung mga expenses sa next year nga na record nimo sa current nga period. So, kana siya cut off. Next is, of course, classification, wherein transactions and events have been recorded in the proper accounts. Meaning, ang asset na belong bagid or na-recorded bagid siya as an asset. Same with your liabilities and so on and so forth. So, that are your assertions in relation to your classes of transactions. Now, let's move on, or questions sa imuhang classes and transactions. So, ang keyword na ginani klase kay COCAC. Mura ko hinumduman sa una. Transactions kay COCAC. Ibalin, i-jumbo-jumbo na ninyo. For kamo, you can have your own, what you call that? You can have your own acronym or mnemonics kay para mas maka-remember mo. Now, next assertion is in relation to your account balances at year-end or at the period end. First is, of course, existence, wherein assets, liabilities, and equity interests exist, or existence is basically the same ra siya with your occurrence, o kung ni-occur siya, kay ni-exist siya. So, meaning, for instance, your assets, existence in the sense nga, kanay mo hang gi-declare dira nga mga PPE amounts is naabag yun siya, or kana nga PPE. Makadungog mo sa akong kuwan class. So, wherein ang kana bagid nga asset is existing bagid siya, mo na nganong giapil ginani mo siya record din ha, or for instance naabaroy mga wala di ay sa company pero gi-recognize niya as part of the asset, like nag-recognize og sakyanan, like na ay vehicle sa imuhang PPE, pero ang vehicle kay dili di ay si company ang gagamit. So mga inana nga mga instances ba. So kana siya, those are in relation to your existence. Now, next assertion is your rights and obligations, wherein the entity holds or controls the rights to the assets and liabilities are the obligations of the entity. So, very careful ka in terms of when your client is a what you call it, a bigger company per se, kay kanuman diha man na mo come in ang kanang mga intercompany nga mga transactions. Kanagod sa inyong AFAR, na ba mo'y AFAR? No, may AFAR class? Or wala pa mo naka-AFAR? Like mga consignment, naka-home branch, nana mo, di ba? Oh, so, di ba sa AFAR is libog-libog na siya gamay. Kaya again, lahi ba ang recording? Pwede ba sila mag-separate recording? Pwede sila separate og FS, pwede pa sila combined, di ba? Now, imuha lang gid ana is careful lang ka as to kinsa ang dapat mo recognize ana nga certain asset or nga certain liability, wherein kana mga intercompany nga mga transactions is well accounted ba? Di ba? Kaya naman na agad as I mentioned sa inyong AFAR, naman na yung mga nga mga instances. So, dapat is properly identified lang sa imuhang FS ang mga assets and imuhang mga obligations. Now, dili gid na siya directly makit-an sa imuhang FS kaya naman, of course, ang ibutang raman dito kay liability nga ang amount, di ba? However, asa na siya nimo makitan, ato na siya sa imuhang mga notes. Kay dito na ang mga specifications. So, dito na mo reflect nga kung asa payable to, asa ni receivable from, nangin ana nga mga instances. So, muna dapat ang imuhang isapod nga bantayan kay mo po na ang mga maka-tricky or kanang makalibog good kay kana pareras lang tag-iya ang kwarta kay mura ra gatuyok-tuyok ang kwarta class nga maglibog na ka kung kinsay dapat mo record and so on and so forth. So naging mga inana nga mga instances. And then again, you also have completeness here in your assertion for account balances, meaning all assets, liabilities, and equity interests that should have been recorded have been recorded. And lastly is valuation and allocation, meaning your assets, liabilities, and equity interests are included in your financial statements, and the appropriate amounts and any resulting valuation or allocation adjustments are appropriately recorded. So, unsa man yung mga valuations and allocations? Like, for example, in your inventory, unsa nga inventory method ang iyang gigamit baron. So matter man na if mag FIFO ba ka, mag weighted ba ka, di ba? So kana siya kung kana ang amount sa inventory nimo, unsa man ang imuhang gigamit ana niya nga valuation method. Same would apply to your PPEs o if imong PPE kailangan bag mga revaluations. Same would apply to your investments. So kana siya tanan is dapat they are properly reflected or kana siya dapat taro nga mga valuations ang imuhang gamiton sa imuhang mga assets, liabilities, and your equity. And then if there are any adjustments, they should be recorded as well. So, mo na ang isa po sa inyong bantayan as an auditor. So, if maka-remember, di siya maka-remember, pero naa niya na class sa auditing report or, hindi sa auditing report. Sa notes to your financial statements, I don't know, mana ba mo constructive. Basta, na nasa notes to your financial statements, na ginay portion dito nga nag-include jud ka unsa mga accounting policies nga gina-apply sa imuhang organization or sa client, di ba? Kung sa ikaw accountant nga side ba, imo ginang i-include dito nga unsa nga specific nga PFRS or whatever IFRS ang imong gi-follow for this specific kind of accounts. Inana kay again, mao man ang basis or mao man ang mutabang ni auditor to check nga. For instance, ang gibutang nimo dito, nag-follow ka sa PFRS 15 kanang sa revenue di ba, revenue recognition. However, inig-check ni auditor sa imuhang pag-declare sa imuhang revenues is dili day siya ni coincide sa imuhang PFRS 15, di ba? So meaning wala imo nang gi-violate imuhang assertion about valuation. So kana siya important nga part nga maskin taas kayo na imuhang notes class pros and or taas kayo na ang NFS nga imuhang makadawat niya as an auditor, imo gyapon nang i-read nga mga parts kay mo man ang mo help nimo niya in assessment. Next is last assertion is about presentation and disclosures. So here, balik-balik, diba? Ingon ko, balik-balik kayo ang mga assertions. So there is in relation to your presentation and disclosure, as I said. So you have first, occurrence and the rights and obligations, meaning disclosed events, transactions, and other matters, have occurred and pertain to the entity. Next, you have completeness, meaning all disclosures that should have been included in the FS have been included. Classification and understandability, meaning financial information is appropriately presented and described and disclosed are clearly expressed. And of course, accuracy and valuation, wherein financial and other information are disclosed fairly and appropriate amounts. Disclosures in the sense nga dapat makita siya sa not just within your statement of financial position, statement of financial performance, but most of the disclosures are seen gyud sa imuhang NFS. So kana imuhang mga i-compute class tag one page ra na sila kasagaran no. However, asa man bawion ara ka sa imuhang notes to financial statements magdugay kay diha man tanang disclosures mahitabo or diha man nimo kasagaran makit-an gyud diha gyud kasagaran diha gyud mo makit-an ang mga disclosures sa imuhang NFS. So ang imong balance sheet one page ra pero ang kanang iyahang mga notes mamara 10 pages 15 pages, di ba? So inana na siya ka tedious when it comes to paperwork. Ana gyud sa FS bawi utanan ana na kita ang mga presentations and disclosures. So as an auditor, dili na nimo i-disregard ang parts sa NFS no. Kasagaran gani mo ni maoy di kasagaran pero ka most of the time magtan-aw kay diha man nimo makit-an ang mga breakdowns, diha man nimo makit-an unsa ang mga changes nga gi-apply sa entity, unsa ilahang mga amendments no namna sa NFS tanan. So kana dako kayong tabang as sa auditor ang NFS sa usa ka organization or sa usa ka client. So those are your assertions. So again, balik ta ha sa imuhang classes na kay kokak sa imuhang assertions about account balances na kay kanang receive ako receive and then sa imuhang presentation and disclosures you have COCA. So kana siya. I hope you can remember those assertions because again, as I mentioned, these are the claims made by the management on their financial statements. So these are the things that will help you check or will help you decide on the appropriate procedures para to check to check the occurrence, to check the completeness, to check about the accuracy and valuation, to check about the correct classification. So kanima na siya ang help niya nimo as an auditor. Questions so far? Okay pa ta sa assertions?
Yes. Okay pa, Miss.
Next, let's move on to your audit procedures. So, the auditor uses assertions for classes of transactions, account balances, and presentation and disclosure in sufficient detail to form a basis for the assessment of risk, material misstatement, and the design and performance of further audit procedures as I made mention. Now, the auditor uses assertions in assessing risk by considering the different types of potential misstatements that may occur and thereby designing audit procedures that are responsive to that assessed risk. Now, selection of the appropriate procedures to satisfy a particular assertion is affected by a number of factors, including the auditor's assessment of materiality and risk. Now, regardless of the procedures selected, there is only one basic criterion. The procedures selected should enable the auditor to gather sufficient appropriate evidence about a particular assertion. So, meaning whatever procedure you deem may be appropriate, at the end of the day, or your goal as the auditor is of course to gather evidences. So, makita nyo sa katong graph ganiha, di ba nga, you do audit procedures to collect audit evidences which would then be your basis in forming your audit opinions. So, mo na siya ang basically outline or sa mahitabo gyud sa audit. Now, unsa ang mga procedures nga pwede nimong buhaton as an auditor? So you have inspection, which involves examining of records, documents, or tangible assets. You also have observation, wherein you look at the process or procedure being performed. So kaning observation is tan-aw ra ka kung sa dili jud ka nga ikaw ang di ka nga mangilabot ka, mo observe ra ka kung saan nila pagbuhat. Then inquiry diri is you ask na. So observation, dayon ka mangutana, so mo take down na ka sa notes, o sige buhat ni staff and so on and so forth. Sa inquiry is diha na ka mo seek og information about the entity. Now, confirmation consists of response to an inquiry to corroborate information contained in the accounting records. Now, confirmations are usually done sa imuhang mga transactions related to your customers or to your vendors. For example, i-confirm nimo ang value or i-confirm nimo ang amount stated sa imuhang accounts receivable. So, of course, you send confirmation letter to your customers. If ganahan ka mo i-verify or i-confirm ang imong accounts payable, you send confirmation letters to your vendors or to your suppliers. So, muna siya ang mga confirmation. Later on or in the succeeding chapters, di ba, there are different kinds niya of confirmations na pwede nimo buhaton as an auditor. So, kani siya is mga general lang ni siya nga mga procedures. And then next is your analytical procedures, which consist of the analysis of significant ratios and trends, including the resulting investigations of fluctuations and relationships that are inconsistent with other relevant information or deviate from predicted amounts. So, kani siya is more on mas complicated na nga mga procedures which you will encounter later on if we'll be talking about mga test nga pangbuhaton niya. So, those are your audit procedures. Now, again, these audit procedures are done for you to obtain evidences, which is also another topic later on. Yun yung magian. Now, evidence refers to your information obtained by the auditor in arriving at the conclusions on which the audit opinions is based. So, your audit evidence may be in the form of a source document. Source document being kanang, for instance, mga sales order, mga purchase order, mga official receipts. Those are examples of your source documents. And then accounting records, wherein kana imuhang mga general ledger, general journal, mga sales journal, and the like. So those are your accounting records. Now, this evidence about your FS will either prove or disprove the validity of management assertions. So, as same sa akong example nga gihatag ganiha, di ba, about katong valuation, about katong accuracy, nga igtan-aw nimo your source or your audit evidence is your OR or katong nakuha ni mga OR gikan sa imong supplier, di ba, nga sayop ang ilhang gibutang nga VAT. So katong nga evidence nimo would already prove or they would already disprove the accuracy claim nga assertion sa management. Kay tungod nga naman sayop man ang ilahang amounts nga naka-reflect or sayop ang amount nga na-reflect sa ilahang accounting records kay tungod sayop pod ang imong audit, sayop pod ang imong source document. So yan na siya. Then at the conclusion of the audit, the auditor should carefully evaluate the audit evidence obtained in order to come up with an appropriate opinion. So ikuan gyapon nimo if maka-remember mo sa atong previous kag istoryaan about katong mga errors, frauds, and non-compliance, part na siya sa imong assessment. So kato imong nakit-an nganong wala man to na check ang accuracy ato. So was it an error or most likely it is an error on the part of the clerk, di ba? Kay wala niya gi-double check or wala niya gi-recompute ang imuhang VAT nga payable. So kana siya is mahogra siya nga more siya dili kay siya material nga misstatement gyud or if katura nga specific case lang or katura nga kana siya specific case lang or case to case basis lang siya nga nahitabo. So mga inana nga instances would help you determine if such evidence found has a material impact to the FS of the management or to your client. So, man ang gamit sa imuhang evidence. So, again, okay, let's have the overview of the audit process. So, you have here, the first part is, of course, narita sa sugod sa hagdan na to, in you deciding whether you would accept an engagement or not. Now, once you've accepted an engagement, diri na dayon ka sa imuhang audit planning. So, you start to plan how you will go about with your audit. So, this is where you assessed already the risks that are involved. This is also the time wherein mo decide na ka kung unsa nga mga possible nga mga audit procedures ang imuhang buhaton. Next is your consideration of your internal control. So, kailangan baka magbuhat og test of controls or dili na necessary. And then, if dili na ka necessary magbuhat og test of controls because weak ang internal control sa company, so you can either proceed to performing a more intensive nga substantive testing or kani test of details na. So, after which, ani na dayon ka sa completing the audit. So, more of the gathering of evidences happens kani sa imuhang consideration of internal control and your performance of substantive test. Mas more gyud gani sa kaning performance of substantive test. Depende 50-50. Kaya inani po na inani na siya ang case niya, class. If the company has a strong internal control, so the auditor can do a test of control. Kaya naman strong man yung internal control, so i-test nimo if strong ba gid yung internal control. Now, if strong gani iyang internal control, di ba? Most likely masaliga na gyud or mas mutaas na ang credibility sa FS nga gihatag ni management kay strong naman iyang internal control. So dili na kaayo ka mubuhat og mga substantive tests. So kani sa substantive test ari man to ang katong mga analytical procedures niya nimo. So dili na kayo kamubuhat og substantive test, so mas gamay ang time nimo in substantive testing. Now, if bali pod siya, meaning weak ang internal control, so ari nimo bawion as an auditor sa imuhang mga substantive testings or test of details niya. So, ano na siya man ang 50-50, depende ra gyud, pero kani siyang duha is ani jud ka kasagaran mag-gather sa imuhang audit evidences. Now, completing the audit is kato imuha nang ihanay ang imuhang mga na-gather nga evidences, mo start na dayon ka og make og mga conclusions or mga observations. You communicate with the management for adjustments nga pwede nilang buhaton, and then issuance of your report or where you will already formulate your audit opinion. So this is basically the audit na process. Now, dili na tanitag sa tagsaon kay madiscuss naman yan natin in the future nga mga chapters, no. So isa po, audit planning is already next chapter. Internal control, gamay ra atong itap niya ani because you've already discussed this sa imuhang accounting information system or sa imuhang AIS. Basically, the same ra gyud sa class. Naratay ipuno gamay as to the risk na part, like control risk, detection risk, ano man na part sa imuhang internal control. Kani substantive testing, similar to your internal control, nga naa na po siya sa imuhang AIS in the sense nga diri pud ma-discuss kato imong mga transaction cycles, revenue cycle, expenditure cycle, and the like. So naman na siya yung mga different nga mga test of control, test of details na pwede nimong mabuhat, no. So more on the general lang pud niya sa imuha niyang substantive test. Then ari na pud ta mo focus again sa imuhang completion of the audit ug sa issuance of the report or what kind of reports you will do. So mo na inyong ma-expect niya in the next na mga chapters ahead. So this is just a run through on magsugod dito sa katong uban ha, kay again dili na dato istoryaan. Diretso ta sa first step, which is accepting an engagement. So as a firm, dapat naapod mo'y criteria or choosy pod mo in terms of when to accept an engagement or not. Because your clients can also reflect what kind of firm you are. One way or another, it can help you reflect what kind of firm your company is or your organization is. So you also need to decide when you accept an engagement, when not to accept an engagement. So first is ari ka sa imuhang internal na part, or there are two. You assess yourself first or your firm, and then you assess your client. Now, if mo assess ta sa ato ang shortcut pa ni. So kung ari na katulad ni mga kuan kani. So when you assess your firm, ari na mo come in ang competence, independence, ability to serve the client, and ability to serve the client. So mo na ang in relation to your firm. So meaning, I believe na discuss na po din nato no sa code of ethics man yata nga part or sa katong professional standards. Basta nga important gyud ang competence, meaning does your audit staff, the audit manager or the audit partner capable of performing the audit on that specific nga industry. So kana apil na siya sa imuhang considerations in terms of competence. So meaning, if dili gani mo ready, that is when the firm can do additional training para at least makompetent ang ilahang mga staff. Like for example, mga fresh grads maging kasagaran no kanang manhadayon sa mga audit firms. Now, as fresh graduates or kanang bag-ura nga CPA, what you learn kasagaran sa undergrad is more on the merchandising service o manufacturing nga mga industries. However, general lang siya nga mga concepts, di ba? Like general kaayo. So there are instances wherein si employee or si junior associate is na siya mga terms nga first time lang niya madunggan or wala siya kabaw unsay pasabot ana. So that is the time nga si firm iyang tan-awon nga si whoever is the team leader or the audit manager or audit nga partner assigned ana nga staff is maka-impart siya og knowledge sa imong junior associate nga this is what it means, this is what you should do given nga like this and like that ang ato ang client and so on and so forth. So ikaw pud niya as a associate kung kamo puhon mag public practice mo niya bago pa mo sugod, ayaw mo kauwaw gyud nga mangutana sa inyong mga heads or sa kana inyong mga supervisors. Dili mo mag-uwaw-uwaw kay it's better na nga mangutana mo kaysa magpataka ra mo buhat din ha or magpataka ra mo buhat og mga procedures baron or anything sayop dahil na inyong gibuhat so ang ending sayop manda makasab-an man noon mo or maka-cause pa noon siya um maka basta more disruptive na noon siya in the first place pwede ra man dahil mo mangutana di ba. So ingana na lang gyud siya ayaw mo kahadlok because those heads are dugay na pud na sila sa dugay na pud na silang ga-audit. So maka-share gid na sila, maka-impart na sa mga knowledge niyo. Yung unang buhaton if para i-test nyo if di mo sure di mo confident nga competent mo to audit a client, example first time pa man ninyo, you need to be resourceful so mag-research sa mo una, search mo sa internet, ngita mo tabang ni Google kung unsay dapat buhaton ani no if dili makatabang si Google ninyo kaya for example it is really something unique sa client o diyan na mo come in nga mo ask na mo help from someone else. So it doesn't mean that you are not competent, it means that you are really willing to learn. So kana ra siya. And the next is your independence sa firm, meaning there are no conflicts of interest. You can really uphold both independence in appearance and independence in mind. So, kana siya, balik lang siya taning confidence. Confidence, independence, muna pula. The next is your ability to serve the client properly. Ability to serve the client in the sense that you have enough staff nga mobuhat sa imuhang audit engagement niya o depende lain man sad kaayo nga modawat kag client di ba nga dako kay siya nga client pero sa inyong firm is tulura mo kabuok nya dili ra pa jud isa ra inyong client ha so unsaon man inyo pag audit sa dako kaayo nga client kung tulura mo kabuok na you are handling other clients as well. So mo na imuhang dapat i-take into consideration when it comes to your firm. Now, kaning isa is your integrity of the prospective client's management. Kani is in relation na po niya siya sa imuhang client. Meaning, you will assess if your client is really worth accepting. Dili man sa choosy ka, pero as I mentioned again, your client or the kind of client you have may reflect on the kind of firm you are. So if modawat ka og kanang mga shady nga mga clients or for example mga clients that have questionable practices, ikaw as a firm is maghuna-huna po ka unsa kay imuhang integrity, di ba? Or unsa naman ang imuhang balik kasi imong fundamental principles class. Are you still practicing your professional behavior? Are you still practicing your objectivity, your integrity, your due care? Di ba? Kana siya mo na imong i-assess. So, dapat when you are choosing a client, you need to keep in mind that dili ma-compromise ang imuhang mga principles, not just individual principles, but the principles that should be upheld sa CPA nga profession. So, mo na imuhang dapat hinumduman kung mandawat ka client. So, you can either ask from the previous auditor sa client, di ba, kung okay ra ba ni siya nga client, murag manghiring ka sa imuhang client, manghiring ka sa imong prospective client, bang okay ra ba ni siya nga client, dili ba ni siya di ba ni siya choosy, dili ba ni siya hassle kaayo ka transact, or wala ba ni siya mga shady nga mga pangbuhaton or mga shady practices that are against your principles. So kana you try to mag-reconnaissance ka class mo na siya basically ang sa imong buhaton in terms of the management. So kana siya ang about accepting an engagement. Another thing before I forget, kasi malimtan ako. Sa accepting an engagement, these are preliminary pa ni siya nga mga activities ha. So dili gid necessarily nga nagsugod na gid ka sa imong audit. So preliminary pa lang siya sa imong planning activities. Kay lahi man sad ang katong imong planning na part. So mo lang na ang imong hinumduman gyud sa kaning accepting engagement. So imuha pa is assessment pa ka nag-assess pa ka sa inyong firm's capacity and capabilities, and also assessing your client. So mo pa ni siya ang sa imong accepting engagement na part. Now, mo na akong gipang mention ganiha, basahan lang yan ninyo. Okay, and then next is retention of existing clients. Now, it doesn't mean that when you are accepting a client is for new clients ra siya or mo apply ra siya for new nga mga clients. You also need to have a reassessment of your existing clients, whether you would retain them or not. Now, usually, naara na yung maximum period kung pila ka years ka pwede ma-auditor ani nga specific client, di ba? I think it was mentioned in our previous discussions already nga si external auditor, for instance, dili siya pwede mahimong auditor ni client or ni client for I think not more than 3 or 5 years, I forgot. Basta na siya kay again para walay close relationships kaayo nga ma-build. So imagine na if si kanira gid nga auditing firm ang nag-audit ani ni client sukad-sukad nga na-establish na ni client. So di ba maka-form na siya murag mo-form na siya biases kay tungod ma-form siya biases kay kaila na kaayo ang tag-iya sa firm ug ang tag-iya sa ug ang kanang management sa client nimo, di ba? So naagid kay mga at least ma-changes nga dapat bukaton. Now, if aside from that, kanang if bag-o pa lang nimo siya nga client, nga nag-decide pa lang ka nga imo siyang dawaton or i-audit again next year or siya i-client gyapon siya nimo next year, diri maghimo gyapon kag re-evaluation. So meaning imuha gyapon i-assess nga based on your past na relationship with this client, based on your past na audit experience ani niya, would you still want to continue auditing this specific client? So mo na siya ang imuhang i-take into consideration kay there are instances man nga katong first pa na si client nimo, di ba nga magpahumot pagid na si client, meaning or humot lang gyud si client basically sa external. However, nagid ba yung mga instances nga naada na yung mga tinatagong baho, di ba? So mo na ang kanang pwede nimo makit-an as a auditor or as a firm nga diha na nimo ma-realize if nigwork na gid ka with that specific client. So dili ra gid ka mo base gid solely sa kato imong initial assessment nila. So if you are to decide if you would like to retain an existing client, aside sa kato imong first impressions or first reasons why you accepted the engagement in the first place, o in-agree assessment nimo, i-take into consideration nimo ang imong mga experiences. So if si client ang iyahang mga management dairon pag audit nimo sa prior year is dili sila cooperative, like hesitant sila mohatag og mga records or kana basta mayroon na nga mga instances so which can affect your audit procedures, or si kani siya nga client baron is kusog kaayo let's say dili siya mo follow good sa kung sa iingon ni auditor, like the auditor ikaw mohatag ka kani nga specific nga pwede adjustment kay ilang pwede buhaton, tapos si client is hesitant kay siya, so again dili siya cooperative ba, so ikaw auditor ganahan pa day ka makiktrabaho ana balik ni client, di ba? Dili na lang nimo i-complicate imong life oy. So you would rather terminate the engagement rather than continue working with that specific client. So ingon na siya nga mga considerations ang imong dapat keep in mind when you would like to retain a specific client. Now, if you already decided nga dawato nimo ang isa ka client or imuha siyang i-retain, this is where your engagement letter comes in. So, as mentioned before, di ba, sa atong past nga mga discussions, dapat nagyo proper documentation, written communication, di ba, dapat naka in writing gid na siya tanan. So, your engagement letter signifies nga naa kay contract with your client and your firm or si auditor. So, meaning, in the engagement letter, dapat na din haang objective sa imong audit. It is explicitly stated na you are doing this audit to perform or to give or to express an opinion on the financial statements that are presented by the management, and then explicitly state po din ha nga it is the management's responsibility to prepare the financial statements and of course the assurance that it is fairly presented. Another thing nga makit-an sa imong engagement letter is the scope of your audit, meaning since kani man ta sa external audit, so assurance engagement ang atong gihatag. Pero if there are instances wherein review and compilation engagement lang ang ipabuhat ni client, o appeal na siya sa imuhang scope. So dapat naka-explicitly state po na siya. And then next, the forms or any reports or other communications that the auditor expects to issue. Meaning, unsa ang responsibility po sa auditor. So, dapat naka-state na din nga si auditor is mahatag siya auditor's opinion, and then your audited financial statements, so unsa nga mga reports ang kailangan buhaton ni auditor. So, again, those are to be explicitly stated. Another thing is your limitations of your audit. So, of course, included therein are the unavoidable risk that material misstatements may remain undiscovered. So, dili ka pwede or dili ka madali-dali og ingon ni client nga nganong wala man nimo makit-e ingon ana, because again there are unavoidable risk there. You as an auditor need to let your client understand that what you can give is only a reasonable assurance, which is diha nga part na nimo state nga naay limitation sa imong audit. So, walay 100% assurance nga makita na nimo tanang mga inappropriate nga mga practices sa kana nga organization or sa kana nga client nimo. And then, lastly is the responsibility of the client to allow the auditor to have unrestricted access to whatever records, documents, and other information requested in connection with the audit. So, kani siya is important pud kay ni siya nga part because there are organizations wherein hesitant gyud kaayo sila nga magpakita sa ilang mga records. Diri nga part nga mingon sila nga mahadlok sila mga auditors, baka dili man tas lang ngay mahadlok, kung wala kay gitago dili mo gid ka mahadlok, di ba? But gana siya kasagaran, try me nga inan ka nga asa man inyong letter nga pwede mo mangayo og ingon ana, then kato nga experience ka sa kay internal audit na gani mi ato. Like, within the organization na gani, so nanay memo nga nagpagawa, so kailangan pagyapon mi muhatag pag like amo jud ipakita sa siguro na nagbasag memo ay nga head ay kay inanaon gyapon mi kay tungod dili sila muhatag dili sila muhatag ana kana kung unsa among pangayoon as an auditor ba. So kato siya is internal ganito nga experience. How much more if external organization wherein you really are from an outside party, nya mo at kalit kag adto sa ilahang department, nya mo ingon ka nga I need this, I need that, and then wala jud ba na, di ba, inig ka audit ninyo may laila ra ba ka sa imong management or sa top management ang kana mga tao diha is dili ba gyud dayon na makaila sa imuha. So ang engagement letter ang mo help ninyo introduce sa inyong self as an auditor niya nga okay, we have this letter, then we are allowed to ask for access to any documents needed for our audit and so on and so forth. So kana apil pa ang engagement letter ang inyong ipakita para makaila ang mga staff sa inyuha niya if magbuhat mo og audit. So that is your engagement letter. Now, in addition to that, of course, dili mawala ang imuhang billing arrangements. Kay wa man ka nagbuhat og audit for free. So, dapat inyo ginastoryaan ang about sa imuhang fees. So, diri na makam-in ang katong talks about professional fees. Diba, ato na discuss ato ang code of ethics. So, dapat explicitly stated gid na kung unsay basis sa inyuhang fees. Is it daily rate? Is it a package rate? O si client ba ang musagot or mo disburse ba si client sa inyuhang mga expenses when you are doing audit? If for example, na ba mo yung mga meal allowance nga i-charge to client, yung mga travel expenses na i-charge to client. So, kana siya tanan in relation to billing arrangements or should be explicitly stated in your engagement letters. Same would apply kung kanus si client mo bayad ani. Like for example, kailangan si client mo bayad og 50% at the start of the audit and then at the remaining and then dapat si auditor is muhatag siya og weekly expense report for reimbursement and then at the end of the audit period diha pa lang ibayad fully ni client ang ingon ani ingon ana state po na nimo din ha if kana ang imuhang fee is inclusive of VAT or exclusive of VAT tapos mo inan ang mga instances. So again, everything should be properly disclosed. Muna siya in terms of your billing arrangements. Another expectations of receiving management representation letter. So, kani siya kana you are when you talk about management representation letter, kamo ang nagkuan sa management, kamo na represent sa management. So basically, more siya para sa tuganiha nga kung adto ka sa imong mga different departments o naay magpaila sa inyong self nga kamong auditor, more siya kinana. And then arrangements concerning the involvement of other individuals, meaning experts, auditors, internal auditors, and other client personnel. So, diri na mo come in if you would like to communicate with the prior nga auditor sa kanang firm or if you would like to communicate with the internal auditors of that specific nga client. So, kanaan na nimo state. And then, of course, request for the client to confirm the terms of the engagement. So, naginay part nga I hereby agree to all the terms and so on and so forth. Ingon ana. The signed by the president baron or the CFO of the company or whatever representative they have. So, muna siya ang usual contents sa imong engagement letter. Again, usual contents because you can add more if you like. However, kasagaran, adding ra siya, di ra siya makuhaan. Muna basic nga informations that are found in your engagement letter. Now, for the importance of your engagement letter, of course, it can avoid misunderstanding with respect to your engagement. Dili si client, dili na siya makaingon nimo nga dili ko mo bayad ani, dili ko mo bayad ana and so on and so forth kay wala na nato nasabutan. So wala na yung mga ingon ana nga mga conversations because again, everything is already explicitly stated. So if naamoy mga conflicts or misunderstanding, you go back to the engagement letter. What was stated there? Who has the specific responsibility? Is it the firm? Is it the client? So, balik lang mo sa inyong engagement letter. And then, document and confirm the auditor's acceptance of the appointment. Next. Now, this is in relation to your recurring audits or in relation to your retention of existing clients. So the auditor does not normally send new engagement letter every year. However, the following factors may cause auditor to send a new engagement letter. Now, again, dili necessary to send a new engagement letter every year. You can do it if you like, pero dili siya necessary. However, if wala ra kay changes, pwede ra dili nimo i-state adto. However, if there are mga adjustments or amendments to the conditions of your previous engagement letter, that is the time wherein the firm can send a new engagement letter to the client. So, any indication, these are following factors or reasons which the auditor may send a new engagement letter. So if there are any indications that the client misunderstands the objective and scope of the audit, so kana pwede siya, any revised or special terms of the engagement, and then any recent change of senior management, board of directors, or ownership. Nga naman class, kay para kabaw ka kung kinsay imong daganan. Kung na ay mga mahitabo. So like lain masad kaayo di ba nga. For instance, sa imuhang first nga engagement letter, si person A pa ang um, chairman or president sa kanang organization. Now, maski namatay na gani siya, wala gyapon nimo ilis si imong engagement letter. So, naay nahitabo niya, manginahanglan nag-point person o igtanaw sa engagement letter, si person A pa ang naa didto. Nya, dili na ka makagukod ni person A, kay namatay naman siya. So, mo na, ina na nga, ina na nga mga reasons, di ba? So, kana even change in management can be a reason for you to change your or to issue a new engagement letter. And then, of course, significant changes in the nature or size of the client's business, even changes as to the scope and limitations of your audit, then legal requirements and other government agency pronouncements. Now, when an auditor decides not to send a new engagement letter, it may be appropriate for the auditor to remind the client of the original original arrangement. So, kani is reminder lang. So, kasagaran sa reminder is i-resend na to balik ka katong first nga engagement letter. Pero dili na nga mag-resigning pabalik ha. Pero inig audit planning or inig entrance meeting, no entrance meeting ba tawag ka sa external audit. Pero ka opening meeting pwede i-restate lang or refresh, recap as to the original nga coverage or conditions of your engagement letter. Now, next is to the audit components. Now, when an auditor, last na nga part, when an auditor of a parent entity is also the auditor of its subsidiary, branch, or division, the auditor should consider the following factors in making a decision of whatever to send a separate letter to the component. Again, mag-send ka, baliduha ang imong gi-audit ha, para yung confused, si parent o si subsidiary or si branch and so on and so forth. So, ikaw ang auditor nila both. Like, for example, separate man ang ilahang FS. So, kani, you need to, what do you call that? You need to identify who appoints the auditor of the component. You need to identify whether a separate audit report is to be issued on the component. Now, there are other companies nga isa ratanan, meaning naka-umbrella ratanan sa parent entity ang audit report. There are others pod nga ipa-separate gyud. So, depende. And then, of course, legal requirements if it is required by law gyud nga dapat separate gyud ni siyang entity regardless, also dapat separate gyud imong issuance or separate imong paghatag og engagement letter. And then the extent of any work performed by other auditor in the sense nga, for instance, si parent entity or si no not si parent entity, si subsidiary na entity is manginahanglan siya help from other auditors. O so dapat naka-state pud na dito sa imuhang letter no kung unsa ang coverage of work sa other auditor. So kana siya. Then the degree of ownership by the parent and then the degree of independence of the components management. So those are also explicitly included in your letter. So these are your different components. Now, I think that is the end. Yeah, this is the end of the chapter. You can refer to your book to look at the sample na engagement letter. So, na-sample na engagement letter na dito sa inyong book. So, you can take a look at it. Now, that is about accepting an engagement letter. Dali ra kaysa? Any questions? Questions?
None for me, miss.
Wala, wala, miss.